We make our shots. We all do. That's what we do. That's what we do. And we keep doing it.
Good morning, gentlemen. I really appreciate this conversation. Michael Arnold, Danny Pope, the grandson of Eve Arnold, Danny Pope, the printer of Eve Arnold's work. And this conversation for me it's a bit fan, because I don't know if I've ever mentioned this, but I think it was 1990 or 1989. I walked out my exam, art exam, and I walked home from Waterloo to Vauxhall. And on the way there, I walked past the Hayward Gallery. As I had a school uniform on, I could walk in and have a look at the show that was on display. And that was the first time I encountered Eve Arnold's work, and particularly the Malcolm X print. And it resonated in me in ways I really can't begin to explain, but it meant a lot to me. And it really allowed me to understand the power of a photograph on a wall and how it can transform the people that look at the photograph. And ever since then, it made me curious about Eve Arnold. And so when working with Danny, I saw he had the Malcolm X print on his wall. More questions ensued, of which I would like you guys to answer. So Danny, beginning with yourself before we introduce Michael, tell us your first memories of Eve Arnold walking into your shop.
Well, she never came to me, but once, much later on. But I always went to Mount Street, to her flat. Okay. So I used to go there, talk to her. I mean, Linny used to send the transparencies to me, but quite often I went to pick them up. So basically I went backwards and forwards to Mount Street on my bike with the print strapped to my back. There's Linda McCartney and Eve Arnold, and I can't remember who recommended me which way. Okay, I just can't remember. And possibly maybe 30, 40 years ago I'd remember, but I just don't remember. But I didn't really know who Eve Arnold was or what she was when I met her. She just wanted her prints made, from the transparencies, which was particularly difficult in London at that time. And it just grew from there.
Absolutely. And so I just wanted to jump in and ask Michael as well. So at what point did you know your nan wasn't just your ordinary nan?
It's a good question. Someone asked me that before, and well, there's two answers. So the first answer is that, I think I've always known that she wasn't an ordinary grandmother. I think from quite a young age, she was someone very special to me anyway. We always had a very close relationship. And even kind of age 10 years old, we'd go out and I'd go to her flat in London. I used to live in Manchester, and I would go and visit, and she'd take me out. And we just always had this very special bond. And as I grew older, she became like a friend and a mentor, really, someone I could confide in. I would tell her everything that was going on in my life, and she would just have this amazing wisdom, and she would listen. She had this amazing ability to listen without judgment, and she would occasionally tell some stories and kind of offer some words of wisdom. But I never called her grandmother or granny. I think she just wasn't that kind of person. If I called her granny, I think she would be in shock. She just wasn't that kind of grandmother. But she was just, like I said, a friend and a mentor. And then gradually, I guess it was maybe around 12, maybe, that I started to kind of see that. Actually, one kind of pivotal moment. So we went out to a ballet show. She took me to Sadler's Wells. And after the show, someone came up to her and was just in absolute awe. And they're like, "You're Eve Arnold, oh my God!" And she just had a nice chat with the person, and it was just very just kind of answered the questions, and was just kind of very, very kind of kind and courteous. And I'm thinking oh wow, that's amazing. People look up to her and put her on a pedestal and treat her like a film star or like a god almost. And but to me, she's my grandmother and she's my friend, and it's kind of, that was a weird kind of juxtaposition. But that was kind of around the age that I started to realize that she was someone who'd done some amazing things in her life. And later on, I got to work in her office, in her home office, when I was about 16, and got to learn about her archive and her work. But also I got to learn about some of the most important events of the 20th century through her work. So, for example, the civil rights movement, I learned about through her photographs of it. And just coming back to the first story about the person who came up to her, who was kind of starstruck, I think it's really interesting because that also taught me something that Eve wanted to portray in her photographs too. So whenever she photographs someone, whether they're a celebrity or ordinary person in inverted commas, what kind of shone through was something of, she tried to capture something of who they really were, and I think that's what kind of makes her photo stands out, is the kind of the compassion that she had for the people that she was photographing. And it was a real kind of lesson for me of kind of, these people that are put on pedestals, that are celebrities, are no different from you and me. They're just flesh and blood. And kind of seeing that with Eve, and seeing kind of people treating her that way. And to me, she was an amazing woman, but she was my friend and my mentor. It was a really interesting learning.
Absolutely. I think it's something that you said about how great a listener she was, because it sort of comes across in the photographs. And there's something that I remember myself and Danny commenting on, where it was the one of the woman washing her tights, Danny. I don't know if you remember that.
No, she's lying in the bath. It was, I mean, I'd like to add on about the way that Eve photographed. So what was occurring to me in the past months or years is basically they were not manufactured portraits. That's what set her aside. Now, my true love of documentary photography, and why I liked Printing for You. It was a similar sort of documentary. So with the, for want of a better word, the icons of our time, whether it be Malcolm X, whether it be Marilyn Monroe, John Huston, whoever, doesn't matter, Paul Newman, etc. These aren't manufactured portraits. So what we're seeing with icon photography is basically photographers who were employed by whoever to go and take a portrait of a person. That's a very, very different thing to taking a photograph of a person in real life, should we say. So that doesn't mean that the person doesn't realize they're getting photographed for a purpose, okay? So for example, your Wu-Tang photography is, they know they're getting photographed, but it's not manufactured in the sense that it's not in a studio. I kind of get a bit cold with manufactured portraiture. Maybe some photographers who have their own studios in their own living space, maybe. But there's a very, very big difference between Eve's work and many other photographers. And it's wrong for me to name those photographers. But what I get satisfaction from is, especially with the Malcolm X print that I've created and editioned, is, again, we've got evidence of the two cameras. Eve always had 2 or 3 cameras, a couple around her neck. And she had one which was the portrait, and one which was the environment, should we call it. So a wider lens and a longer lens. So this, I think, she took milliseconds or a couple of minutes after she took that. So that is a separate camera. So you can see there's somebody in the background, he's in a relatively similar pose, and this is the portrait I love even more than the one that's on my wall. But I like the story to it. I like the journalism. I like the photographic angle. I like the fact that there are 2 cameras always around, and she did set it up. It's particularly sharp, this one. She didn't light it, except from ambient lighting or whatever. You can tell that from the other frame, from the other camera. So this is what I admire about Eve, or any other photographer. I mean, any other author of photography. I mean, the print, as far as I'm concerned, is the repository of that moment in time. So you could say the film is the repository of that moment in time, and the print is, should we say, the ultimately the memory. But it doesn't really matter. But it's the analog process, the fact that she had two cameras, and most importantly, that she was a disciplined photographer behind the mantra of Magnum, which was full frame. To be
Yeah. I mean, my mind is actually blown, because again, this is the reason why these conversations are so important. It's that revelation of the second shot, of the second shooter, and the slightly different context of it, but still the same eye, still the same inquiry. Sorry, my mind is blown. I'm just coping with that. But it's interesting how it. Yeah. So, sorry. It's this thing about the shot, the iconic shot versus the moment. And obviously, I'm excited because I'm into the moment where they met, the moment where these conversations are happening, where the hand goes behind the head and you portrait landscape. Wow.
I mean, obviously, she would have wanted the ring. She would have wanted his. I mean, he was a good-looking guy, and I almost like that the time of day it was. Everything is there. So
she tells a story about it being a collaboration as well. Because I think in retrospect, she talks about how he was very aware of how he looked, and he was very aware of the kind of image he wanted to present. So there's a story that she tells. She had an exhibition at the International Center of Photography in New York. And these young black photographers came up to her, and they were looking at the photograph of Malcolm X, and they said, "Thank you for making him look like a dude." And she said, "Oh, thank you," but it was a collaboration, because she really enjoyed that kind of interplay where he would set up something and she would set up something, and it was like he was someone that had an understanding of how he was going to look and how he wanted to look, and she said working with him was a real pleasure. Because of that, basically.
Absolutely.
But one of the reasons, anyway.
I mean, what a beautiful choice to have.
Sorry, then I'll finish. But again, it's ambient light. It's she was with him in that room, whatever that room was. It could have been somebody's office. I have no idea. It could have been a supermarket, because there's certain pictures within the supermarket on the telephone. So, but it was created within whatever moment in time that there was. And it wasn't manufactured. It was a collaboration, as you say, Michael.
Yeah, and I think for Malcolm X to have Eve Arnold as a collaborator in both of their consciousnesses of what this narratives they're trying to tell. Did Eve also take the picture of Malcolm X in the hall where there's a sign saying the only God is Allah? And he's got dollar bills in his hand.
Yes, that's awesome. Yeah.
I mean, this is my point. Who was it? The time that these two great figureheads will happen to be in the same place, the same time, both New York, both very much trying to tell these stories of not so much of a new world that was emerging, a new consciousness that was emerging.
It's impossible to know, but I mean, I imagine that, do you realize history-making moments at that moment? In fact, there's a very good documentary upon that, the recent photograph of Trump, a history-making photograph. But there's a moment in time, and there's a resistance, and everything that Malcolm X stood for, that's completely different to the shot of the moment, if you see what I mean. So I've got about working, I'm putting together around about 30 to 40 images of that whole sequence of events. Please tell me if I'm right or wrong. I think it's Chicago and New York, isn't it, Michael?
There was I think it's
Over
both.
a couple
Yes.
of years.
Yes. Because there's also this one that I love, which is part of the same series. So this is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and the caption for this is: so these are children of members of the Nation of Islam, and they're being shown around the Egyptian exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art. And the caption that Eve wrote for it was, the children are being taught about their ancestors, and they're told that when the white man was swinging in the trees, their ancestors were making pharaohs and pyramids.
Thank you, Nation of Islam, for clearing that up for me, because I need to be reminded. Thank you. Love that. What a beautiful portrait. And I think, again, it still comes down to this idea of Eve Arnold's ultimate empathy and sensitivity. The other conversation I remember having with Danny, again, about Eve Arnold's work was the color portrait of the sniper and the horse in Mongolia, I believe it is.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I've got that one too. Yeah.
Yeah, please. And just the levels of patience that's required to make that shot. And I think you, Danny, explained it to me that they managed to train the horse to lie down while they lay a gun. They use it as a gun rest to then fire at people in the distance.
Basically, I'm afraid to say that the horse gets shot before the soldier gets shot. So,
right, okay, should have known better. Yeah, there's no romance to war, is there?
Not really, no.
No.
So I think. Yeah. But I would thoroughly recommend the one book on photography. I mean, it's not because I'm an Eve Arnold,
Thank you.
There it is.
Yeah.
So, but the book I would recommend to inspire in two ways: being a woman and being a photographer.
Yeah.
And I think in retrospect, this book I'm talking about.
Eve Arnold's In Retrospect book.
Yeah. Is one of the most important books because she was a listener. She did go on assignments to whether it was Harlem or whether it was Malcolm X or whatever assignment, or to films, to Marilyn, etc., etc., etc. But I think it's, I think most of her wisdom came from reflection. So you as a photographer, your wisdom of the, yes, you know what you're trying to take, but it's really the reflection of looking at a roll of film and knowing which frame is the shot you were looking for. Then, of course, there are other shots. So what I prefer to think with Eve is she is a listener. She was a listener and a storyteller, but it's from the path of this wisdom is from her path. So I think that with photography in the last century, it wasn't fake.
I understand.
It wasn't manufactured, and it wasn't. She did it. She did do. I think it was Pretty Polly. I beg your pardon. I'd forgotten that that leg shot was Pretty Polly. I forgot.
Oh yes, there's an advert for Pretty Polly. Yeah. But I wanted to also say, Eddie, it was really moving to hear you saying that Eve was a big inspiration to you in getting into photography.
Absolutely.
And I can see that your work, your approach to photography, there's a similar desire to get something of the real person behind the kind of personality, and to tell a story that is genuine and real.
Absolutely, and I definitely that was definitely my takeaway from understanding what photography could do, particularly as I saw those prints on the top floor, I believe it was, of the Hayward Gallery. But it's made me realize something, that potentially the philosophy and potentially the thinking and the sensitivity that Eve Arnold had and was, it's still with us, isn't it? I think part of what you're doing, Michael, is you're maintaining a sense of democracy in our work. It's the it's the most affordable photography I've managed to own and be proud of and frame and have hanging in my home as I ordered stuff from your website. Almost shocked at the price at which you were selling it for, because it seemed like you cleared all the dust and all the webs away from this idea of editions and what an image is, when the bottom line is we just want our heroes on our wall, and you've made that possible. Is that just Arnold DNA, or is there something that you wanted to maintain here?
It was quite conscious, because Eve was always very keen for anyone to be able to own her photography, to own her work. And one of the very first exhibitions she ever did, she sold her prints at a price that students could afford. She wanted young people and students to be able to afford the prints. She later found out that what often happened was that art dealers would buy them up and then sell them at a profit. But yeah, kind of right from the beginning, when I kind of took over managing the estate and started the website, that was very kind of clear in my mind that I wanted to kind of be true to her wishes, that we should be able to offer something that is the real thing, but at a price that students can afford. And so the first thing I did was I did a run of posters. So we started producing the posters, and they came out really nicely. And what I kind of started to realize was that creating a print is very different from seeing it on a screen. Yes. And because these days we often see images on screens, we see them on Instagram, but it's a very different process, as Danny has spent his whole life mastering that process of taking something that looks good on a screen and actually making it look like a beautiful object that you can hang on your wall. And I remembered I met Danny when I was about 16, and first of all, I was very lucky when I was growing up, because on my walls, my family's walls, we had a lot of Eve's original prints there, and a lot of them were produced by Danny. And just the quality of them and the kind of the radiance, the kind of inner radiance that they had, I started to try to reproduce that, and I realized that it's not a simple matter. So I tracked Danny down. I Googled him. I tracked him down, and we had like the first time we talked since I was 16. We had a long conversation on the phone, and kind of reminiscing about Eve, and you know, he kind of talked to me about his process and how he'd kind of, because he started off in the darkroom. He started off in Cibachrome printing in the 1980s, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And because of the digital revolution, that everything is gone digital now, there are very few people who can actually take that knowledge and that wisdom that they gain from the darkroom process and put it into the digital realm. And I was told by some people that, oh no, you can't make a digital print that is as good as an analog print. But this is by I won't say who it was, but it was by people who kind of, you know, supposed to know what they're talking about. And I believed that. And I talked to Danny, and he said, no, that's not true. And over the last few years, he's time and time again shown how that isn't true at all. And the prints that he produces, in many ways, actually better than the vintage prints, because he has things at his disposal that weren't available in those days. But his real kind of magic is the ability to take that analog feel and that depth and that warmth of an old vintage print and reproduce it in the digital realm with such stunning beauty. So when you see it, you hold the object in your hand. I mean, I can show you something like this, for example, and you can see it on the screen. But you need to actually hold it in your hand to appreciate the beauty of the object. And as Danny always says, you know, it's not a photograph until it's a print.
Yeah. Can I add something here? The art behind it was not to copy analog, but it was to make a facsimile of a photographic print. Those are two very different things. So you can't create analog, but you can create the facsimile, the perfect facsimile of a photographic print. And I've written tons about this pure subject, But it's also having the eye. It's like people, have asked me to write how to print. Well, you can't. It's the eye. That doesn't mean I'm better than you or worse than you or whatever. But it's like what you do with photography when you teach. You don't teach people to photograph. You take them out to photograph. So that's how they learn.
Yeah. Teach them how to feel more than anything else, I think, is the key here. And the feel of things that you create is really quite beautiful, Danny. And personally, I come to you seeking that feel from time to time, because it helps me put something in context. Danny, you famously said to me many times, and every photographer that walks into your room, you'll never be as good as Eve Arnold. And I don't take that as an insult. It's like, I know.
I don't think I've ever said that.
You say to every photographer that pisses you off, you'll never be as good as Eve Arnold. Get out of my shop.
I may have said that your body of work may not, because I don't believe in singular objects being. I believe the body of work is the lifetime of work in photography. Whether you're a father photographing your children as they grow up, or a photographer, or a war photographer, or a documentary photographer, etc.
And I think that was definitely my takeaway, and it's made me respect the body of work more. And also the conversations we've had is that you really help. As a photographer, it's almost impossible to see the body, sense the body's there, but it's only when the conversations with Danny Pope arrive that you actually start to carve out the body, the final images that will make this entire narrative come together, particularly as you're so close to it, sometimes you don't see it. And I feel that's what's happening now with yourself, Michael, that it feels like there's a new body of work coming through now, what for want of a better word, a redux, a new way of seeing, as it were. Maybe we've had the time to see and look at the world and seen that Eve was right. They were there at these really pivotal moments, and maybe it's now a chance for us to revisit these moments and maybe put a newer context on it.
Yes, totally. I mean, that's also one of the real big motivations of my desire to get Eve's work out into the world, is because the things that she was photographing and documenting are as important now as they were then, if not more so. And obviously, during 2020, we saw like the big spotlight on the Black Lives Matter movement, really kind of coming to the fore. And Eve's work with the civil rights movement and Malcolm X becomes even more important to kind of talk about the history of what's happened and where we are now. And Eve's work. The other thing is that Eve's, I guess, mostly or most famous for her work with Marilyn Monroe.
Yes.
And she took a lot of amazing photographs of Marilyn Monroe, and again, kind of was able to capture something genuine of the real person. But I think also I'm kind of on a mission to really spread the word about her other work, because there's so much that hasn't been seen as widely, and there's a lot of work that I'm just seeing for the first time that we're excavating from the archive. We're going through the archive, and Danny's producing prints that I've never seen, like this. This one of Malcolm X. I'd never seen that one before either.
Okay. Wow.
So this goes back to your mention of the price that's available on the 250 editions, we call it. One of the main motors of that is not only the affordability; they're still expensive, but it's basically the engine to create the deeper archive and to show that deeper archive to the world. So the more people that own it, the more that pop up to the surface, and it keeps coming out, because yes, there's an awful lot to Eve's archive. It's a very important piece, the Malcolm X and Marilyn, but I think it was Paul at Magnum said, the beauty of Eve Arnold is nearly every shot that she's got is really lovely on your wall. I can't remember, he said it much better than that. I can't.
I think it was something along those lines. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's two sides. Yes, there are some shots that are more reportage, and some other shots that are perhaps more you'd want on your wall. But I mean, she took about 250,000 images in her lifetime, and what we were never going to digitize everything and kind of make it. But I'm wanting to kind of go through it and as much as possible dig out kind of hidden gems and use that to talk about the issues and the subjects that she talked about. And as Danny says, it's all part of a bigger whole that the sending these affordable prints is also helping us to do this vital work of preserving and disseminating her archive.
And I think what's also important as well is your newsletter that comes when you sign up to the EveArnold.com website. That newsletter is an insight to your voice, but it's also these stories that are so rich that you actually get a sense of you're mining the work. We're seeing these new images, but at the same time, we're hearing these new interpretations, these new stories, and I think it's really powerful. It's one of the nicest reads you ever have, because obviously you read this document, you learn something from it, but you never feel like you're the customer. You're just basically learning something about photography that just isn't out there from you, Michael, from the EveArnold.com.
Wow. Thank you.
And
it's great to hear. No, I always berate myself for not doing the newsletter more often, because it's actually my main job is I do work on the Eve's Archive part-time. I also have another job. I'm an acupuncturist. That's my main job. But I love writing the newsletters because I learn something as well. So I go back into Eve's writings. I look at in retrospect, for example, and I remember stories that she's told me, and it always helps me to kind of give new insight and meaning to her work. And it's just lovely to be able to remember her and remember her stories. So it's really lovely to hear that you really enjoyed reading them. So
no, I really appreciate it. I know you can tell from the stories themselves, they're not easy writes. They're quite rich, and you've not agonized, but you've sat with it for a long time. But that's almost the gift of it appearing in your inbox. It's just like, oh wow, it's another insight, and it's a very personal insight. I don't want to sit with the family and read this. I just want to take it all in. But I am recommending to every viewer here to sort of sign up to the EveArnold.com. Once every 6 months, once every 3 months, you'll get this wonderful thing. Just don't lose it in your threads, as it were, and pay and say to everyone, spend time on the website. And everyone I've recommended the website to always ends up buying something, because it's just it feels like it's and this is the thing I wanted to talk about. It's like how photographers preserve their legacy, because it's for some photographers, the moment they pass, it's over, it's done, and that's a tragedy. Sorry, Danny.
No, you're actually, it's exactly what I wanted to explain. The beauty of the 250 editions is that as I'm doing them, I'm also producing the size of print that's on your wall, my wall.
Yes.
And that's for posterity. So everything will be printed at that size, which means that this is my dream, that people can walk into a place, wherever that is, and see a couple of hundred prints of Eve's, just for the desire to look at the prints. This is what we've lost. And yes, we can see them on the screens, we can swipe down on the Instagram, but there is nothing like seeing the prints. So of course people are going to possibly double sale, but I think 90%, or resell, sorry, not double sell. I think 90% of the people who are buying the prints from the Eve Arnold estate have them on the wall. And we're taking away a little bit of this power of the big collectors who just snap everything up and then resell, or they buy it so that they can make X amount in the future. And of course, we've also got to create the 21st century prints. And the only way to do that is to create them. And then there'll be a box of everything with the Eve Arnold estate for posterity. Michael may have one day an acupuncture place in wherever, And then you'll have this great room. There will be hundreds of prints. And then on this newsletter, somebody comes up, oh, I'd really love to see that. And you say, yeah, sure, come around 4 o'clock on Wednesday. It's not a problem. And to be, because you can't have an exhibition in every single country, every single city, it's impossible. But as long as this exists, that's my, whatever you call it.
And that's something that I've learned from you, Danny, is that, so a lot of people think of the archive as these days as the digital material, the digitized versions of the images. But what Danny has made me realize is actually the archive is the prints, and that's a big part of the work that Danny and I are doing together, is going through Eve's archive and creating the definitive print. Thanks to Danny being able to do this, because the other thing is Danny worked with Eve very closely for many years, so he got to know exactly what she wanted with her images. So yeah, as Danny said, the aim is to have like the collection of prints that are there, that that last for many years, that are archival quality, that are going to be the definitive version of those images. Because with the digitized version, that doesn't tell you how it's going to look in a print.
I think that's just brought up something else with working with Eve, and I'm sorry, it's a long time ago, but she didn't actually say what was wrong with the print. Say, I don't like this one. This isn't right, or whatever. And the truth is, I knew it wasn't right. And I've said this to you before. She was the only photographer. Linda was another one, but I never felt like I was a fake. I felt like I was a fake with everybody else, sort of. But yes, she said, no, this isn't quite right. No, I knew exactly why it wasn't quite right. And then we talk about John Ruck or the sloth. I can't remember what animal it was that somebody had, but it doesn't matter. But then we talked about the sandwiches or the biscuits or the tea or Linny or the fact that this was a really tiny table, and I said it's really lucky that you're a really tiny lady, and I was sort of on this thing. So, but really it was, yeah, that's beautiful. No, that's not right. That was it. And when you've got something like a transparency, which is number one, faded, going purple, whatever it is, but secondly, you can slide project it, you can look through it through a loop. And it's like what I said to you before. When you look through the loop at your contact sheet, you're in that world, you're back in that moment in time. And there is nothing powerful than that contact sheet and that generic and that very first creation. And the transparency is the memory of the slide projected image, the warmth. It's not real because it's projected, but I know that feel that is wanted. But actually, that feel is the representation of what the information is on that transparency.
And that's something that was always amazed me, that whenever I would, from a young age, I would see Danny's prints on the wall, and they had this kind of inner glow to them. They had like, because it didn't Eve have a conversation with you that she wanted you to try and reproduce the feeling of shining a light through a transparency and projecting it onto a wall, but in print form. And that's what you were able to do. And that is something that always stayed with me, is kind of that memory of that's how the print should look. There's this kind of inner glow.
Yeah. But oddly enough, it is the fact of looking through a loop. It's the same as looking at the projected. It's a warmer light, of course, but it is the loop. And when you're doing the test strips and everything else, you're looking through the loop. So what we've got in the digital age is the complete reverse of that. So what happens is I only judge what work I've done with a print. So what I'm doing is dragging it back to the generic of the creation of a print. So you've got two types of print. You've got the strip test, and you've got the print in its entirety, and et cetera, et cetera. So when I go back to talking about the facsimile of photographic paper, what happens in digital now and all the profiles you've got is they boost up the contrast, they make highlights brighter, and hey, we've got an analog print, but you haven't, because that's, there were lots and lots of different types of black and white printers. The most difficult thing for me, and everyone poo-pooed me as a wimpy bar printer because I printed in color, but it was actually way more difficult to produce a color print than a black and white print, because you could get away with fucking murder with black and white. You know, oh yeah, we're using this paper and we're doing this, and look at that, and it's wicked, and blah blah blah. So, but what you had to do with color is you had to reproduce that feel of looking through the magnifier. So what I said to you before, with black and white printing or color neg printing, I would produce a contact sheet which I looked right and was not ugly.
Yes.
And again, you're looking at it through a scope, because you've got to see which one's sharp or whatever. So again, what you're doing is reproducing what Eddie, what Eve saw when he first got whatever the next day. It was lovely, reflection. You'd shoot something, and in a day or whatever, you'd get all the film back. So it was nice. It was a nice era. I was very, very lucky. That's my brand.
And it can make the difference between like the emotion kind of coming out or not coming out in the photograph. I think that's one of the real important things of your work, Danny, is like a good example is this one. So this is Monroe in the desert. Actually, I'll take it out of the sleeve. It's on the set of the Nevada desert, the set of the Misfits in the Nevada desert. But there's a real kind of melancholy and kind of poignancy to the image, because she's learning her lines, and she was really struggling at that time. Her marriage to Arthur Miller was breaking up, and she was kind of struggling with her self-esteem because she was on the set with these really polished actors, and she was really struggling to learn her lines. And there's something about the kind of the depth in the clouds, for example, that there's this kind of real heaviness you can see in the clouds. And I've seen prints of this where it's that depth isn't there. I'll try and see, but there's a kind of the needing to understand the context of the image in order to produce a print that is true to the image, I think is a big part of it, because it's not just a technical process. It's like conveying the emotion, and that can either be done, you know, kind of well, or it can be done as a beautiful, you know, stunning piece of art.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, we live in photography, and we imagine it's as much technology as it is art, but so much gets lost in translation, from translating it from the negative to the positive. And I think it's an experience that you can't just walk into. You can't just assume I've got the best scanner, the best laptop, and therefore I'll get the best file. It's never that simple. And it's taken, I think, roughly 20 years of arguments between myself and Danny to really settle on where we are, because I'm a freak for technology. I'll chase every new scanner that ever comes out with every type of spec there is, only to just come back to Danny every time and go, nah, I just didn't do it. It just doesn't do it. It has something in it and it has a quality, but it's not it. And how we define what it is almost, you know.
Well, what it is doesn't exist. So a negative technically exists, but the image does not exist.
Yes.
Therefore, if you have the same discipline or the same thought process, what you gather, the information you gather through, because this is where we are, 21st century, where it's scanned, it's digital printing, whether it's on chemical paper or or other paper or whatever, it's still digital. Okay, so, but you have to gather all of that information so that it no longer exists. In other words, it's flat. It's got every single piece of information that's on that piece of film. That means a very, very large file. And then you bring it back to life on the screen. But then you have to handle what you've brought back to life. So even with Michael, I mean, every time I do a print or an edition print, or a different size print from one edition, I have to redo it. I have to not redo the file from scratch, but I have to match. It's not easy.
Yeah. And I find that interesting because you also match per scale. It's like we had this conversation earlier where I was basically having large format exhibition prints made up, having an 8x10 version of the print made up, then drum scanning that so that the digital version is a clone of the analog version, just to be told by Danny, it's not.
No, that's bollocks. That's bollocks, because when you create it's the wrong fucking way around. What they should be, if you're cloning a contact print, yes, or an enormous print. Yeah. So, for example, if you make an enormous print with an enlarger, yes, then the grain's going to be big.
Yeah.
If you create a 10x8 print and then drum scan or scan, then the grain is not going to be big. And even if you blow up that drum scan or that Danny Pope scan, it's still going to be the same as a text. Therefore, if you really want to clone a 34x24 print, you'd cut it up into little pieces, you'd scan every single piece, you'd stitch it back together again. And Mr. Photoshop has got this very unique sort of press a button and it does it for you. So I used to do it manually. And then you've got the clone.
Yes.
But then people say, oh, the grain's not sharp enough. Oh, it's a bit too grainy. And people think that analog photography means grain. No, you have to understand the grain.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean you pump in everything to make that grain even sharper and harder.
Yeah.
That doesn't make an analog print. That just makes a grainy analog print.
Yeah.
So, for example, do photographers use 400 and push it a stop film because they want grain? No, they shot it because there wasn't enough light.
Yeah.
They actually didn't want grain because that was, to them, ugly. Hence, people shot large format cameras and they used lighting, etc., etc., etc. But, you know, this analog grain thing, grain does not exist when you look through a loop, does it? So
no.
So it's that you're not saying, oh wow, God, you know. So grain does not exist on a Polaroid.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. It doesn't.
So we're all getting our knickers in a twist about what analog is. Well, analog is what's on your wall. Analog is what's on my wall.
Yeah.
How you get there, I'm afraid, in the 21st century, is digitally.
Mm-hmm.
And you could have the best Canon printer, you could have a £70,000 scanner, and all these things. It's like me giving you a Ferrari. Does that mean you beat Lewis Hamilton? No, but you could probably just about drive it. Can't remember if you drive, but it's irrelevant. It's not the machinery. Oddly enough, the machinery that was built in the late 90s digitally was built to make it feel as close to analog as possible.
100%.
But it was very, very slow.
Yeah.
It was very slow.
Yeah, agreed. 100%
but it was
agreed.
The closest you could get. So whether it's a drum scan or whatever scanner, I don't use a drum scan, but you know, it's irrelevant. It's who is operating it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's something that's forgotten. I think, again, even with drum scans, people revere the drum scan for what it is, but people forget the drum scan is a scanner that has a human operator. Every other scanner doesn't. It's a push button affair. And it's sometimes we forget it's not the scanner, it's the human that's operating it, that's paid 40, 50,000 pounds a year to operate this archaic machine by today's standards, but operate it to be the pristine device that it is. It, as you said, it reproduces in a way of its time.
Yeah, but the drum scanner also murdered a billion slides because it was covered in oil. So
Yes.
I couldn't print from them afterwards. Then you had to rewash the transparency. Impossible, because you had just one. So the drum scanner, you had to coat it with oil once upon a time.
Yeah, no. It was almost on trend again 2 years ago, where loads of kids were asking me, where can I get some oil? I want to coat my nails in oil and put it in a flatbed scanner. And it just watched these poor little bastards destroy their work because they wanted to maintain. Again, it's kind of like a myth that comes out in photography, because everyone's trying to hide their secrets, hide the way they achieve their end results, and make up these wonderful little stories that every lab has a story behind it. I love that.
Well, can I be the old kit on the wall? They want to put oil on it so they don't have to re-spot it. So that's all it is.
Yes.
It took me, on average, 48 hours computer time to finish that horse file. 48 hours.
Yeah, because you go through it like bit by bit. Like you take a tiny section, you blow it up, and you spot it. And I've never seen someone with that much diligence and patience to sit there and perfect it. So it's
So basically, I'm spotting stuff that even if I printed, you wouldn't see it.
No.
But everyone's got their secret. I believe that if you completely restore the grain at 60, 80% of what you've got, you then create the volume that you see in the prints. That's why I'm so hesitant to throw the files around, because with AI and everything else. So the secret behind the lab is diligence, discipline, and patience.
Yeah.
Eve had a quote. She said it's not the instrument is the photographer, not the camera. And you could equally well say the instrument is not the printing machinery, but the printer.
Absolutely.
What you've got to do is keep everything stable. So, for example, Cibachrome, back in the day when I first started this, I had Ilford behind me. So I didn't want, I still don't know how to use computers now, but you put test strips through. So I used to drive up and drop off the test strip or use courier, whatever. And they were up in just under the tower in Tottenham Court Road. And every day they would look at the strip, or every other day, and then basically tell me if my bleach needed X, if the temperatures were wrong. You had to keep that machine completely stable, and you had to feed prints through it. It's exactly the same with digital. You've got to ICC profile. You've got to make sure you've got to keep everything stable.
Yeah.
And then if you've got it stable, you're able to reproduce your eye. That's it.
I understand. I think I feel I need to be honest about something. Those Cibachrome prints that you speak of, Michael, and particularly the ones that Danny made, are so beautiful. And they do have an inner glow. There is something in that material that cannot and has not been reproduced since. And I know Danny says he can and he could do this.
No. I can reproduce the feel. I can't reproduce Cibachrome. Fuji archival crystal bollocks, whatever it is, I can't remember, is pretty close. But it's like the difference between an HD television and a tube television. I don't know how to explain it better than that.
It's the difference between valve and transistor.
It's got the gloss of a Cibachrome, but there's also something wrong about it.
Yeah, I totally agree. The new the Fuji DP2, I think came out in the last 2 years. I kind of find it funny it's called DP, but anyway, DP2 paper is pretty much the closest thing to Cibachrome, but as you said, is something just not quite. It will never be Cibachrome, and I'm not even sure it will ever happen. And I say this about Cibachrome because is it the Isabella Rossellini print?
Yes, yes.
Right. Do you know that print changes form at different times of day? Depending
Yeah.
on how the sun hits,
Can
how the sun
imagine.
hits
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah.
and it's miraculous what's in that print. You can't
Yeah,
see
but
it at
then,
night.
now you've brought
Let me
up
see if I've
another.
got that one.
Now you've got brought up another point to printing. Is what light do you see it under? Daylight, tungsten, shadow.
Yeah.
So I used to have daylight light, but I used to carry them upstairs as well, just to make sure that they function.
Yeah.
So that's another point. But I mean, when I've got 5 million, when you've got 5 million followers, then I'll tell you the trick to make your Fuji archival digital archival whatever
Paper. Yeah, make it pop.
Make it look like a Cibachrome. It's very simple.
Yeah. I don't want to guess, but I imagine it involves varnish. But anyway,
No,
it's not the varnish trick. Okay, cool.
No, you're not gonna, I told you, when you've got another followers, you know.
I appreciate that.
How did you guys? I wanted to ask you, Eddie. How did you guys meet? How did you guys start working together?
I believe I was working at the National Portrait Gallery. I was working on a show of.
It was that woman with the puppy.
Yeah, the woman with the puppy, exactly, and it was Winifred
Atwell.
Winifred Atwell was the first sort of black woman to have a #1 in this country. I think she went #1 in 1952 with her piano playing honky tonk music, and she was quite a celebrity in Brixton. And she did a lot of great things coming from Trinidad. But I needed a redux. We found a postcard, and Danny managed to restore what was a carte de vite into a beautiful piece of art. And at the time, people were struggling with it because it was better than the original, but people just couldn't get their heads around it.
It was a fake.
It was a fake. That's essentially what it was. It was a beautiful, perfected fake that someone would want on their wall because she had this beautiful poodle and a fur coat, and she's chilling in Piccadilly Circus in 1952, having had a #1. And with that, we produced a print of Derek Santini for me for that particular show, as well as I found another Winifred Atwell in the archive of the BBC. And it's from that point on that we had these conversations, and it was in the basement, it was in the dark room, it was over a beer. I'm a lover of dark rooms. I'm a lover of dark room spaces. So those conversations became even richer because for many of my generation, at least the ones that were, we would use dark rooms or community dark rooms to produce our work. They become the places where most photographers will begin to network and get to work out what was going on was in these dark rooms. So it wasn't uncommon for me to turn up at Danny's dark room, for other photographers to turn up, picking up their prints, dropping off their prints, to have these conversations around the print. And also the fear in those photographers' eyes, because they wasn't too sure what kind of Danny they were going to get, because they were coming like, what mood Danny in? I was like, in a good mood today. Brilliant. I don't have his money. I was like, just fucking say you'll pay him. just don't run off with the prints and be a dick and then come back. Because a lot of the time, that generation of photographers needed Danny's prints because that was their income. They were losing their capacity to shoot for the magazines that they were shooting for at the time because everything was being converted to digital, and they could only Danny would make these beautiful prints for them, which they can then sell as art, because somehow it pushed jobbing photographers out of the jobbing photography market into an art market because they had art prints, but they couldn't sustain it. Danny would make these beautiful prints of, I've seen waves on this weird Kodak paper that looked so, you couldn't really know. It was just beautiful. But
that was the closest to Cibachrome color lux.
Yeah, the Kodak that you had. Yeah, you still have a
color lux. It was the Ilford C41. That was the closest.
Of course. And again, it's one of those things. It's of its time, isn't it? Ilford is called Ilford because it's named after a small town in East London, because that's where it came from. And I think
didn't
it's
know
always
that.
forgotten how much of the technology that we had, particularly on this island, was very much innovations from this island that we managed to use to leverage up and level up.
I'd like to say that Ilford was east of London, not in East London.
Thank you, Danny. I needed that. Everyone in Essex feels so much better that you cleared that up.
Exactly. But Eddie, you started out in the dance kind of music scene in the 90s, is that right?
Exactly. I was very much in that world of wanting to document my youth and what I was doing at the time. And it was club photography was my innovation. I was the kid who had a camera in the club, and it took me a while to figure out how to make that work. But when I did, it was good. It was good to remind ourselves that when we were dancing, we were our best selves, especially as a community, as a city. And Danny would know this because he came from the feral generation before ecstasy, where all everyone did was fight. That's all your generation did. You wake up in the morning and fight. And then ecstasy came along and you realize, hold on, we can dance. It's all right.
Yeah. No, I used to be into the rave scene as well, probably at a similar time.
Yeah. But up in Manchester has such a beautiful culture. I mean, Manchester still has a great culture for dance. And were you part of that scene as well?
No, just in the London scene. So maybe I wasn't so much into the drum and bass side of it, more into like the kind of the hippie ravers, more like the kind of the trance and kind of techno hippie ravers.
Side trance, Trustafarians. Yeah, good times.
Yeah.
Good times, honestly, good times. Those guys would squat in the schools in my area, and on a Saturday night, I had nothing better to do, go and dance with the ravers then and just lose your mind. It was great because the mornings were beautiful. The sun came up.
Exactly.
It always came back up again.
And how did you get from that and then into like photographing hip hop stars? What was your kind of breakthrough moment?
My thing was the trade, was being able to capture London, be a part of the scene, pick up loads of promo records and things that I loved at the time, and take those promos with me and go to New York with it and swap and almost do exchanges like, all right, you want this weird underground dance electronic stuff that we're making, take that, and I want your hip hop. And then so I started having conversations with labels, which allowed me to, again, through the clubs, meet the artists, contextualize New York scene at the time, at the same time, and then contextualize the British scene, which were two different scenes, but very raw, very real, and very young. Like it's that magic that only happens after midnight when you're young. And it doesn't matter if you're in New York, LA, or London, there's always going to be that thing. And if you have a camera there, potentially you can capture the moments, the ciphers. There's those moments, particularly in New York, where groups of MCs will gather in a circle and start spitting bars. And I had a camera, so I could capture some of that and watch our youth innovate as best they can, creating these cultures that are now the new rock and rolls. And I think, again, it's reminding myself that I was a gift to my time, and that every photographer is pretty much a gift to their time. And that was what I felt lucky.
No, I love your photographs for that reason, because it captures the rawness and the kind of the moment.
Yeah.
And I think it really speaks to that generation. And I think you're right. Each photographer like captures something of their generation, or something that tries to speak to the reality of the situation.
Absolutely. And that's essentially part of it, really, is just trying to, with the book being called Spirit Behind the Lens, it's about a certain consciousness that photographers they have to make that camera represent what they're feeling and what they're seeing, or particularly what they want to say. And as such, and the same could be said for these conversations. I know we've already spoken for an hour, and I'd love to go on a bit more, but I think for the sake of our listeners that we have to sort of draw a line in the sand and invite them to just sign up to evearnold.com and keep an eye on what Danny's saying, because he's always saying it. And particularly Facebook, particularly Insta, and just be aware that we are conscious people. We care about what we do, and we want to put the best things out in our society, so that it allows us to reflect. And the piece that I have in my upstairs in my bedroom is the one by Eve Arnold that you sold as your poster when you first started, and it's the two girls in the bathroom.
Yes,
black
it's
girl
like
and the white.
integration dinner in the 1950s, black girl and a white girl. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's so beautiful. And what struck me, Danny, is in the middle of the picture, there's like a silver tissue dispenser. The amount of work you must have done to hold that in without it going mottled and going grey and gnarly. I mean, come on, Danny. You don't think we would see
I
that?
think I'd like to end my
Yeah, go on.
voice with, I think I miss the environment and the servicing of photography. That died at the end of the last century and then just sort of stuttered to a halt in the first 10 years of this century. But yeah, it was good it was good meeting people, and it was really good. I felt sometimes I was performing, but it was good to hold on to the analog discipline and show books and everything else. But it did become a performance because I was no longer able to afford to be there. I was no longer able to put the amount, it was C41 by that time. It was color neg. The Cibachrome had already died. So there were contact sheets. There was no 200 rolls of film to, it all died. So the Steidelville shot was great. But yes, I miss the contact with the people of photography. And it's not about hearts and everything else. It's not about comments, especially when they have all these and then fiery things and then fucking Mickey Mouse pictures or whatever the fuck it is they put on there. It's actually
half of Instagram there, Danny.
It's actually trying to engage and to talk and to respond.
Yeah.
And that's what we've completely lost. So what I said before was to bring to life the archive into print form, and inshallah there'll be a place where we can put all these prints up and people can come visit them, is my dream. I mean, that's what I've dedicated my last chunk of life to. That's it.
Thank you, Danny.
Thank you, Danny. Yeah, no, I agree. And that's why it's so nice having these kind of conversations. And thank you, Eddie, for organizing it. It's been amazing meeting you. And I'm sure we're going to have more conversations like this in the future. But as Danny said, it's like, on Instagram, you can't capture the nuances. And I think that's why these kind of real conversations are really important. And I love like what you said about the spirit behind the lens. Thank you for kind of, I kind of had a feeling that that's what it was about. But it in many ways, there's a real similarity between that and what a lot of Eve's work was trying to do. It's like the capturing something of the spirit of the person, but also the time.
Yeah. So, no, and we're honored that the legacy continued, that print I saw in '89, and for generations to come, I want them to continually have that connection to the past, have the connection to icons that are relevant today. We've done really well not to mention Gaza, Danny. So we're really good. Excellent.
Otherwise, the conversation.
Yeah. So Adam, I don't know if you're still in the building, but we could.
I did have one last thought. I was thinking the other day about the change in digital photography.
Yeah.
And I've decided that it's like cosmetic surgery. So what you had in years gone by was people used to spend an awful lot, a very, very minuscule amount of people spent a huge amount of money to get cosmetic surgery, and it was done really well.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you have cosmetic surgery and you go off to Slovakia or whatever, and you could come back in a coffin. Do you see what I mean? And it's much, much cheaper. No, sorry, no disrespect to Slovakia. Anyway, it could be to Birmingham. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, fair point.
And so the point is with digital, it's my last rant. The digital has become so open. It's such a buffet of possibilities that we've lost. It came to me, and I'll get it out. Actually, I haven't got it right, but cosmetic surgery and digital photography kind of work together.